All righty. In honor of everyone's time, we're at 2:06, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We may have people coming in as we've had a lot of people sign up. But thank you all so much for joining us today. I appreciate, like I said earlier, seeing you all's faces and names. Today is going to be a wonderful day where we talk about some trash and treasure across all levels in terms of policy in different states. So we really want to open this space to you all to be honest and just have really important dialogue about these pieces and just whatever we need to discuss. We're encouraging you all to have a high level conversation about it. So I'll get more into that as we move forward. But my name is Marcella Middleton, and I am the Executive Director, CEO with lived experience of Away Home America. I started with Away Home America about 6 years ago, and I was a leadership body member starting off when we reconstituted our leadership body, which is really the equivalent of a board of trustees, from mostly adults to 51+% young people with lived experience. And so I started out on that cohort as a young person. And then I got into this role as Away Home America wanted to really not just say that we're shifting and sharing power to those with lived experience, but actively doing so. So not just having this board of trustees, but also at someone with lived experience at the helm and at many levels of the organization. So our organization is a national advocacy organization. A lot of people get our organization mixed up and they hear that we're, working on youth homelessness. So they're like, hey, I got a cousin. And I'm like, and we can't help you with that. I can give you some resources in terms of, connecting with 211 in your city or state. But we don't do direct services. We're a national advocacy organization, and our work centers around lived experience, but we offer public policy as a vehicle to drive grassroots campaigns. And we also seek to end and prevent youth homelessness. That's our largest piece, but we do that through policy changes at the federal, state, and local levels. Um, and so we work with policymakers and legislators to make these administrative and regulatory changes that have historically marginalized youth and young adults across our country. And in terms of trash and treasure as a whole and what we're going to be diving into today, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're excited for you all to join us. But we're not going to be mentioning any specific bill numbers, but we're going to have that high level conversation I mentioned earlier about legislation that's been introduced across states in this country. And some of these pieces of legislation will reflect helpfulness towards preventing and ending youth homelessness, and that's what we call treasure, or they're harmful to youth and young adults experiencing homelessness, and that's what we'll call trash. Um, and so our goal in that is to suss out those things, but in addition, we'll talk about honorable mentions, which will include proposals that have a mix of trash and treasure in the same bills and don't explicitly mention youth and young adults, or is not at the lowest access point. And so these pieces are really important because the trash and treasure is through the lenses of young people with lived experience. This is not something we're just saying, hey, we don't like that, just as an entity, but an entity of those experiencing these pieces in different states. And so we really want people to look at the trash as an opportunity for growth and somewhere where we can make changes to actually switch it to treasure. And I don't want folks to have a visceral reaction about the title. We just want you to step into the space and lead with curiosity and step into the space and lean into partnership with us to focus on what our ultimate goal is, which is preventing and ending youth homelessness. And we can't accomplish that unless we have an honest conversation about what's not working and what is working. So this year we have another part of the series, and this is the other piece of this Trash and Treasure series. This next one is Trash and Treasure, and it's our community weigh-in, and that's going to be hosted. So take out your calendars, September 3rd at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. And so in that series, that portion of the series, we're going to go deeper into what you all are seeing, or other people within the state are seeing at the state and local level, and how what folks are seeing could impact youth and young adults. And so as such, we've noted the difference in the subtitles with today's webinar titled Trash and Treasure Across All Levels, and we hope that you'll be able to join us for the continuation of the conversation. It's really important to us. We also want to ask that you invite people to that as well, because what makes these webinars is not just what we're identifying as trash and treasure, but also people's feedback around what could actually work in terms of that. So this year, our team utilized a keyword search for all 5 of our recommendations in the 119th Congressional Policy Agenda, that resulted in a total of 154,000 pieces of legislation and more than 5 times the 25,000 bills from last year. This number alone tangibly shows us that many of like things that we've already been feeling, which is that policymakers throughout our country are talking about youth and young adults experiencing homelessness and or other youth serving systems, and whether these ideas could be harmful, helpful, or somewhat like in the middle. So throughout this process, our research team led by Karan LaTourette, who is our policy analyst, along with some of our YPT members who are on today, whittled down a few key trends for each recommendation, which our moderator is going to be sharing with you all today. And so a lot of this comes from our New Deal, and we want you all to dive into that as well, because that's our comprehensive policy proposal, and that's really the epitome of our work and what we're doing here. So finally, our format today will have a brief question and answer portion after each recommendation. So please write down your questions and keep them as concise as possible. We still want to get the intent of what you're saying, but just ask that you keep it as concise as possible, so that we can get as many questions as possible answered. And with that, I would like to thank you all again for being here. And I want to pass the mic to Josh, our policy director here at Away Home America and our host and moderator for today in our Part 1 series. Josh?
Thanks, Marcella. Welcome, everybody, to our 4th annual Trash and Treasure. This is across all levels. This year, we are especially grateful and honored to be joined by a few state legislators from across the country, the most speakers we've ever had for a Trash and Treasure. So I'm excited, and we're going to be covering a lot of ground in a short amount of time for each recommendation. But I'm also excited that we have representation from states that we haven't previously had before during this year's webinar. But as mentioned earlier, to level set, although we're honored to have our special guest speakers this year who have direct experience introducing relevant legislation on our topics of discussion today, we are not mentioning specific bill numbers on this call or participating in any legislative calls to action that could be perceived as direct or grassroots lobbying, as we are a 501c3. Rather, we do invite you into a space of curious conversation as we look at a broad landscape of happenings across the country that would be helpful or harmful in the movement to end and prevent youth homelessness. And if you are curious on diving deeper on any of these issue areas, please reach out to me directly. That'll be a call to action at the end, and I can maybe give you a little more insight. With that, as I give a quick legislative overview on our first policy recommendation, where we'll start, I would like to welcome Washington State Representative Christine Reeves from House District 30 for our first topic, to invest in regularly neglected communities by fully investing in youth-led organizations. And with that, our Rec 1 Treasure Award this year goes to Washington State, with South Carolina taking home the trash and Illinois receiving an honorable mention. Over in Washington, lawmakers recognize that simply investing in communities is not always enough. Strengthening an existing community reinvestment program by making it more intentional, by focusing investments on home ownership, small businesses, community outreach, and services designed by and for communities that have experienced a long-standing racial and social inequity, with regular evaluation measures built in as well. South Carolina gets the trash as lawmakers propose restricting public funding for organizations that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is concerning because our community based organizations are often on the front lines of serving youth and young adults, and limiting their access to funding could reduce supports for the very communities experiencing the greatest disparities. Finally, our honorable mention goes to Illinois, where lawmakers propose matching investments in minority owned businesses and entrepreneurs, a positive step for economic opportunity, but it did stop short of investing directly in the nonprofit organizations that many youth and young adults rely on for long term stability. So, Representative Reeves, first and foremost, thank you so much for being with us today. As our time together is short, we're going to dive right in with question number one. So many communities have learned that broad investments alone don't always address longstanding inequities. Why is it important from your lens to invest in community-led solutions designed by and for the people most impacted, particularly youth and young adults experiencing and or at risk of homelessness?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Josh. And I'll just start by saying, as somebody who experienced youth homelessness, as somebody who grew up in a household experiencing substance use disorder and economic instability, and then just living as an Afro-Latino woman in America, recognizing that my lived experience is not always the lived experience of the power structures that I am operating in, that, they weren't built for me, by me, or with my inclusion in mind. I think it's incredibly important. Representation matters, and that representation has to be, actually incorporated into the public policy work that we are doing. So this past year, being able to codify the Community Reinvestment Program into law, to the tune of $110 million, to be directly appropriated to community organizations on the ground, doing the work, providing the services, engaging with community directly is how we are actually seeing deliverables, if you will, programs that actually meet people where they are, and in some ways remove the barriers and the bias that come with kind of what I like to refer to as white savior programming, and make sure that we're putting people first in that process. And so I'm really proud of the work that we did. It took a lot of finagling to get it through the House and through the Senate, but we've now codified it in law, and it's one of the largest community-directed reinvestment programs. Some folks say the largest direct state grant in our state's history, for by and for organizations. So.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you for your work on that legislation as well. Now, on the other side of the coin, one state passed legislation to restrict public funding for organizations that promote DEI in alignment with a presidential executive order. What role do community-based organizations play in preventing and ending youth homelessness? And what happens when their ability to access funding is limited?
Well, let me start with the easier part of that question, which is what happens when that funding is limited. Our kids get hurt at the end of the day. Our communities lose out because we're not meeting folks where they are, and we're not supporting them in addressing the root causes of the harm that they're experiencing. And when we do that, and it's not just when we say DEI, let's be clear, we're not just talking about race and ethnicity. We're talking about rural communities. We're talking about economic instability. We're talking about folks experiencing substance use disorder. It's not just black and brown, as the current administration would like you to believe. And so what I tell folks is, not only do our kids lose out, but our communities lose out, our economy loses out. These are investments in economic drivers that build wealth equity, that build equality, that build future sustainability. And so it's really disappointing to me to see a federal administration who's not able to connect those dots. But let's be clear, the federal administration is the harm that they're instituting is exactly the harm they want to be instituting. And I apologize if there's any Republicans on this call who feel otherwise. You'll have your opportunity to say what you want to say. But as somebody with that lived experience, I can see firsthand how decisions at the local, state, and federal level impact kids who grew up like me experiencing homelessness. The second part of your question is it's hard, right? Because my emotional response is just, wow, what short-sighted policymakers to be moving into an anti-DEI mentality and really lacking a clear understanding of what the power of diversity, equity, inclusion really means. And again, it's not just about Black and Brown people. It is about folks living in rural communities. It's about folks farthest from opportunity economically, educationally, environmentally. And so for me, the power of the work that we're doing in Washington is really a clear commitment to the power of diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of its formats, in all of its ways. And it's really leaning on people who have that lived experience, right? We've passed legislation called Nothing About Us Without Us. And it's a recognition that your government exists to best support the people it serves. You can't do that if you're not talking to, including, and listening to the people you serve to make sure that we're getting to the policy solutions that best meet people's needs. So we're going to continue doing that here in the better Washington and hope that someday the other Washington takes note and can build a better, safer, stronger economy for everybody across the country.
Awesome. Yeah. So we have 4 more minutes. But I believe we can get to both questions. So our research team found legislation that invested in minority-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, but not necessarily the nonprofits serving youth directly. How should policymakers balance economic development with investments in community-based services?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the goal that we're trying to get to with the community reinvestment program and the economic development bucket within that program, which is, working with the workforce development councils, working with, we call it WorkSource in Washington, which is the nonprofits and private sector partners who build out essentially job creation programs to help ensure that we're connecting actual job seekers to jobs within their communities to help them be able to stay, live, work in the communities they want to live in. I think at the end of the day, though, the challenge that I've seen in public policy, and I'm an economic developer by trade, is that most legislators don't understand the complexities of economic development, workforce development, job creation. And so we can talk about we want to create jobs, we want to connect people to work. But if you don't really understand the nuance of that, I think it's hard to develop public policy that facilitates that because it's not any one silver bullet, right? It's not just, hey, if we just go and invest in trades programs, that's going to get people jobs. Well, at the end of the day, you've also got to be investing in the community supports, community resources, and particularly to your point, Josh, the nonprofits helping facilitate that work because they know their communities best, right? And they're going to be able to determine based on what's happening in their community, what industry supports they need, what workforce supports they need, what educational supports they need. And I do think that oftentimes legislators miss that mark because they're so focused on just educational access or job creation and they don't always connect the dots between those things. So nonprofits do that well. And I think you're right. We probably could do a better job of leaning on our nonprofits who know their communities best to support that.
We definitely could. And as we close this section before we open up for a Q&A from the audience, what do you believe is one investment state leaders can make today that would have the greatest impact on reducing disparities among youth and young adults experiencing homelessness?
I can't speak for folks nationally, but as a mom of 2 kids in public schools, as somebody who experienced homelessness growing up, I think the number one investment and the number one investment I'm fighting for is to fully and fairly fund public education to make sure our educators can afford to live and work in the communities that they're in, to ensure that we are building out the social safety net around our students because that is the one place, quite frankly, if you are a youth in the country, you are going to be engaging in the public education system in some way, shape, or form. And so it's not to say we want educators to do more and to become social workers, but how do we then connect those nonprofits and others to our public education system? So for me, it's about full fair funding of our public education system, which again, our federal administration is not. They're proactively trying to dismantle on behalf of kids of color, youth experiencing homelessness, et cetera. So my fight is how do we prevent that? First of all, how do we protect and preserve the investments we have made? And then how do we strategically and smartly connect? And I'll speak for me, Josh, the last thing I'll say, this last year, I was proud to pass legislation that actually codified the McKinney-Vento statute at the federal level into our state law, because in my school district, we are actually experiencing the highest number of students with experiencing homelessness. And part of that challenge is It's the most property poor district in the state, fifth most diverse in the country. And if we're not investing in our public schools, we are most likely losing those kids faster and they're falling farther behind. And so fund public schools, fund the nonprofits helping those students who are experiencing homelessness, and connect the dots between the two to make sure that our students don't fall through the cracks.
Thank you for that. And at this time, we will now open up our webinar for questions from the audience. As this is a very short 5-minute time frame, we ask that you keep your questions succinct so that we can get to as many questions and answers as possible. So to start, feel free to raise your hand and come off mute or put your question in the chat.
And what Josh really meant by that was, Reeves, make your answers shorter.
No.
I got you.
All right, Lex, go for it.
Yeah, so I was really impressed by how broad the scope of some of the stuff you have been working on was. And my question is it's I feel like in our work we're seeing a lot of pushback against truly transformative pieces of legislation or things that are asking for too much. Like a lot of things end up trying to get watered down because on both sides they're afraid of pushing for something that's truly transformative. Like how do you approach that in your work, and how do you get other people, other legislators and lawmakers on your side?
That's a great question, Lex. And I guess the shortest answer I can give is I'm a Black woman in America. Transformation is our only option because I am operating in a system that wasn't built for me, by me, or with my inclusion in mind. And if I truly believe that kids who grew up like me deserve a fair shake to have a better future, then the only option for me is transformation of the system. I think to your point, though, how do you actually get that transformation to work? Sadly, because I'm operating in an institution not built for me, by me, or with my inclusion in mind, I still have to operate under some of the same rules that were built for, quite frankly, half dead white dudes who own land in a part-time citizen legislature. It's learning those rules, navigating those rules, and figuring out what people care about, and then figuring out how to build a coalition of the willing to make that transformation happen. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen like that. But you stay committed, you stay focused, and you keep working at it. And I tell folks we'll get there. And we did. Community reinvestment was a huge lift for us. We've gotten over $300 million into community for that transformational change. And I'm really proud of that work, but there's still work to do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we have time for one more brief question before we move to our next recommendation.
And Josh, I'm happy to also just put my email in the chat. If folks, not everybody likes to perform questions on the spot, I'm happy to follow up with folks by email as well.
Perfect. And with that, if you have any closing remarks, Representative Reeves, we can close out this rec.
Yeah, just thank you guys so much for the work you're doing. One, thanks for making the good, the bad, and the ugly fun. I love the trash panda, so that I'm gonna have to borrow that. But just thank you to everybody on this call for caring about our young folks and making sure that we don't lose sight in all of these big problems that we're trying to solve in the world. That quite frankly, if we're taking care of our young folks, particularly those experiencing homelessness, and we all come to homelessness in very different ways, so doing it without bias or judgment, but a recognition that if we take care of these kids and we make sure that they get a fair start, that ultimately our communities, our society, our culture is just going to be better for it long term. So thank you for the hard work that you all are doing.
Thank you. And thank you for speaking with us today.
Yeah. Thanks, friends.
All right. Now we'll jump over to our fourth recommendation to invest in youth and family supportive services with the lowest possible access point or points to qualify. Our next speaker will be Senator Mary Knesh of Minnesota's State Senate District 30, whom I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage as I give our very brief legislative overview. So this year, our Rec 4 Treasure Awards go to Minnesota, California, and Vermont. Oklahoma takes home the trash, and Maryland receives an honorable mention. Over in Minnesota, lawmakers proposed a comprehensive foster youth bill of rights that aims to strengthen young people's autonomy, expand protections, and automatically enroll eligible youth in extended foster care to help prevent a benefits cliff as they transition into adulthood. Over in California, it also stood out by centering youth voice in foster care transition planning, ensuring that young people have a say in decisions about their housing, education, finances, and future, while recognizing the importance of culturally responsive supports. And Vermont earned a Treasure Award as well for investing in dedicated school staff and services to support students experiencing homelessness before challenges escalate into disciplinary action. Oklahoma gets the trash, where lawmakers proposed limiting adoption opportunities for some families while allowing placements that may not affirm a young person's identity. Our team found this concerning because every young person deserves a safe, stable, and affirming home where they can thrive. Finally, Maryland received an honorable mention here for expanding access to school-based mental health professionals, which is a meaningful investment in prevention, but one that stopped short of addressing the continued reliance on school resource officers as a primary response to student needs rather than secondary or tertiary. And with that, Senator Kanesh, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's get started with question number one. Several states consider legislation that would strengthen foster youth rights, including your state, support family and community connections, and give young people a greater voice in planning for adulthood. Why is youth autonomy and participation so important when designing supports for young people transitioning out of foster care?
Matake everybody. It's good to be here. Well, your question is such a great one because for so long, our kids that are in foster care really were kind of voiceless and oftentimes faceless. And especially as they grew older and perhaps had their own thoughts and ideas about what was necessary to thrive in a very rough, tough situation at one of the most precarious times in a young person's transition and their developmental milestone. So it's really we really looked at that and we recognize that it's a huge struggle, and recognize that as our foster kids are aging, out of foster care, that there's a real personal concern and oftentimes terror for that young person if they're not sure what will happen next, where they will live, where their finances will come from, all of those sort of things. So as these youth are emerging into adulthood and at the same time, they're exploring their own identity, their self-reliance, their ability to make their own decisions. We see that that is such a precarious time when these youth are actually experiencing more instability. They're often very vulnerable and susceptible to trauma and abuse. The loss of their support network is terrifying. And so when we build the autonomy into this process, this allows those youth to make informed decisions, have informed choices around their education, their housing, their career path, even their health. And that really helps to build their confidence and their self identity as they go forward. And we want to make sure that they're building self-sufficiency and life skills. We want to ensure that they are able to maintain supportive relationships that they already have, that they're not just cut off. And then, of course, we want them to continue to participate in and take ownership of their decisions and how they are going to either exit the foster care system, perhaps stay in the foster care resource system, but then also in a way to, make sure that the unique challenges that come with this process, that we have those resources available for them. And we've been really intentional about that in Minnesota.
Thank you for sharing. And on the trash side of things, one state proposed legislation that would limit adoption opportunities for some families while allowing placements that may not affirm a young person's identity. From your perspective, how important is it for youth to have access to safe, affirming, and supportive placements? And what are the risks when those needs are not prioritized?
Wow. It is absolutely imperative that we focus on on the resources that are going to help with the that transition or the going into the families or the housing opportunities that those youth might be able to have. It's a huge responsibility for all of us to make sure that those resources are available as that individual is developing their own personality. When we limit the opportunity for folks to provide safe places, safe resources for these youth as they are aging out. If we don't, the cost benefit is going to be extraordinary as more and more of these youth are going to experience homelessness and possibly health issues, addiction. But also, when we look at the future for these folks, these young people, if they end up, in the in prison or jail or other sort of programs that are going to end up costing the public more. It's so much more important, and it's certainly the most humane thing to do is to invest early and continue those services as needed for sure.
Thank you. And I do believe we can get to the last two. So many youth across the country experience a benefits cliff when leaving foster care, as you briefly touched on. What are some of the most effective ways that states can ensure that young people continue receiving support during the transition to adulthood?
Sure. Well, in a quick answer, the states can most efficiently and effectively support those young people through adulthood by combining extended foster care expansion, workforce and economic stability measures, community-based youth engagement programs, making sure that these are all data-driven and not just, this is what somebody thinks about it. It's really important to continue to provide those support networks because these things will help bridge the gap between adolescence and independence, which is really a hard bridge and transition for any adolescent, but especially those that have experienced housing and personal instability. In Minnesota, we have extended educational graduation so that they can take a couple extra years to meet all the high school graduation requirements. We've extended the services and the response resources. We've created employment opportunities, done our best to provide housing stability and kind of the overall well-being of them. It's really interesting when we look at how we can expand those foster care services past the age of 18, which was kind of that cliff. We in Minnesota provide those services through age 21, especially when it comes to housing subsidies. And Minnesota has a large population, a diverse population, and we know that like our American Indian kids, our African American kids, and often our Latino kids find themselves in situations that could be prevented if we are continuing to invest in the best way.
Thank you for sharing. And in brief, what is, as we close before Q&A, what's one change other states can make today that would most improve outcomes for youth transitioning out of foster care and reduce their risk of homelessness?
Sure. Well, I think I mentioned that extending those additional years in the foster care system has really shown significant improvement outcomes. We know that it increases the high school credential completion by, I think, 8%. 5 to 12% of the youth go on to college, and we see a significant rise in full-time employment. And so I think the best thing that we can continue to do is extend those resources to our foster kids. But just as Representative Reeves mentioned, investing in education, public education. I was a public school teacher for 25 years. And I saw firsthand the struggles of kids in foster care and homelessness. And if we can continue to improve on those resources in the educational, wraparound services in the educational system and extend the time that that the foster kids have access to resources, I think we will be doing the best we can for a very, very vulnerable population.
Thank you for sharing. And at this time, we're going to open up our webinar for a brief Q&A from the audience. So if you have a question, go ahead. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that we've been working on here in Minnesota foster care Bill of Rights legislation, so that that ensures that those children can maintain meaningful relationships with their brothers and sisters, which I think is another really important thing. This legislation requires siblings to be placed together when possible. They should be able to contact each other frequently and stay informed about the changes in their siblings' placement. I mean, I came from a very large family of 13, and to this day, we still stay very closely connected. I can't imagine, the extra stress it is on our youth when they are not connected to their siblings.
Thank you. And I do see we have a question. Both Sam will go to you first, and then we'll go to the chat.
Hi. So my question really revolves around giving young adults and youth that autonomy. How do you think, what are some ways that that balance can be kind of achieved with giving them that autonomy and those decision-making powers, as well as ensuring that they are receiving the supports that they need?
Sure. When we make our decisions about ourselves, or when we are involved in the decision-making process, it gives you that autonomy. And for these young people, where because of oftentimes nothing they've done, just the circumstances of their family, find themselves in very traumatic situations, allowing for them to be in part of the decision making. Do they want to go to this school? Do they want to stay at their same school? How do you want to, what kind of clothing do you need to be successful in your school or in your lifetime? So that autonomy is absolutely important as they're developing it, but it also gives them practice for the future when they have to make some decisions on their own. And if they haven't had that chance to do that, that can be, that can really wreak havoc with their mental health, their physical health, and just in their basic decision making.
Thank you. And in a minute, if you can do it, how has the state's interactions with ICE shifted your work with foster youth, if at all?
Well, Minnesota, as you know, we're inundated by ice this winter, and two of the communities that I represent, Fridley and Columbia Heights, probably had the worst. I mean, any given day we had over probably 1,000 officers roaming our streets and harassing our public, especially our communities of color. And we know that oftentimes those are our most vulnerable folks that live in our community, whether they have legal papers to be here, or they were born here, or they're being profiled because they have brown skin. And so I think at that time, our schools really came together to look at how we are supporting all of our students. and providing the mental health, food when families felt afraid to leave their homes. We went to their homes to bring the kids to school where they had breakfast and lunch at no cost. We're around the people that loved them, supported them, around their friends. And so I believe we were much more intentional about paying attention to those most vulnerable students. And I think at the end of the day, we did a really good job of it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Senator. And we'll move on to our next recommendation. All right, we'll move on over to recommendation number 2 to actualize economic and social restitution for Black and Indigenous Americans that also includes land and home ownership. Unfortunately, Assemblymember Nikki Lucas from New York State Assembly District 60 had a scheduling conflict, so I'd like to welcome her constituent and liaison, Kim Gill, to the virtual stage as I give a brief legislative overview. This year, our Rec 2 Treasurer Award goes to Maryland. Iowa takes home the trash, and New York receives a wonderful honorable mention where we'll start. So in New York, lawmakers proposed creating a task force to examine the state's role in slavery and develop recommendations for reparations. Our team recognized this as an important step toward accountability, while also noting that the proposal presently stops short of outlining how reparations would ultimately be funded or implemented. Maryland earned the Treasurer Award by taking that one step further, proposing a clear pathway to fund economic and social investments for communities impacted by generations of discrimination. Finally, our Trash Award goes to Iowa, where lawmakers proposed limiting how race, history, and systemic inequities are taught in schools. We found this concerning because understanding our history is essential to understanding the disparities that continue to shape housing, wealth, education, and opportunity today. And with that, Kim, thank you so much for jumping on and joining us today. As our time is short, I'll kick us off with question number 1. Many states have begun acknowledging the lasting impacts of slavery and historical discrimination, but few have grappled with what comes next. What are the challenges and opportunities in moving from studying these harms to developing meaningful pathways for restorative justice and actualized investment?
Well, thank you for having me today. I appreciate being on this forum. And firstly, I would like to say that just in studying reparations and acknowledging the problem as a whole, we have to look at it in terms of where is the eligibility and the funding. Some of the challenges that comes from producing reparations legislation is from people finding out, trying to learn who is eligible to receive reparations. And there's a lot of ambiguity between the terms Black, African American, and people really don't seem to understand what that means. So just finding out who is a descendant and making sure we have lineage-based legislation. So the Assemblywoman, she has been working behind the scenes to see if we could put something together in terms of finding out who is eligible, but also we need to think about the opportunities that arise. People have a very narrow mindset about what is reparations, what does that look like? And some people perceive it as receiving a lump sum of money, and it's not always that. It could be investments in the community, whether it's in labor, workforce opportunity, economic development, and also education. So we need to find out where those gaps are and see how we can bolster the Black community and get them some restorative justice that way. So it's like really reimagining what reparations looks like and also making sure that those benefits are tangible for the community as a whole.
Thank you. And, on the other side of this coin, as mentioned in the legislative brief, some states have moved to limit how race, history, and systemic inequities are discussed in educational settings. Why is it important for young people to understand this history when discussing issues such as wealth gaps, housing disparities, and reparations today?
Oh my God, this is very important because the effects of slavery and everything that happened after slavery are generational. We cannot talk about slavery and the effects of slavery without talking about the generational effects. If wealth can be built in generations, so can the loss of wealth. So we have to re-examine how these communities were affected. Excuse Yes, so the effects of slavery, it is generational. And so is the loss of wealth. So when we think about communities like Rosewood, Ocoee, we talk about Black Wall Street, all of these communities were bolstering wealth for their own community and for generations to come. And then they were lost through racial terrorism. So now we have to think about how can we restore that for everybody across the everyone across the country. So we have to think about policies that can help just fill those gaps, because we also know that it's going to take 200 years to rebuild close the racial wealth gap between white and Black people. And that estimate is about over 200 years or 250 years. We don't have that time. So what can we do now in this moment to restore justice for Black people across America?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim. One proposal that we also reviewed focused on creating actual funding mechanisms for communities impacted by historical inequities. In your viewpoint, or from your viewpoint rather, what does meaningful investment or repair look like for communities that continue to experience the effects of past discrimination?
Yes, that would look like investing in education, investing in home ownership opportunities. The Assemblywoman, she has definitely been trying to invest in more home ownership opportunities within the 60th Assembly District, which comprises of East New York, Cyrus City, Brownsville, Canarsie. So home ownership is one of the key ways we can build wealth. And we know that land is power. So home ownership opportunities, also workforce development. The Assemblywoman, she really prioritizes making sure that Black and Brown communities have opportunities in the workforce, and just closing that gap and just filling in those spaces and creating opportunities where they need to be. So absolutely, this is what we believe.
Thank you. And to close this section, when you think about youth and young adults today, what is one lesson policymakers and advocates should remember when considering how historical inequities continue to shape housing and economic opportunity?
For the youth?
Yeah, for youth and
Oh,
young.
absolutely. We just need to know what their needs are, because we're seeing right now they're being put at a complete disadvantage, especially on a federal level with all the legislation coming out that is really going to set them back a few years. Like even with college tuition, we're seeing that right now. Just making it harder for them to have access to education, making it harder for them to get jobs when they come out of college, putting them into debt when they graduate college because of the limits that's being placed on what loans they could borrow. So we need to see what their needs are, and we need to listen to them, more importantly, because if we're not listening to them, we're going to see some really serious problems going on in the future. One of the recurring themes I'm hearing from the youth is that they don't feel supported. Some of them, they don't even want to start families because they don't feel like they have the stability, or they're going to attain the stability to be able to start a family. And then we're also seeing the after effects of that is a declining birth rate. So we really need to start listening to our youth and seeing what their needs are and considering what how we can help them.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this recommendation and speaking on behalf of the Assemblywoman. And so at this time, we'll open up this section for questions from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand and come off mute, or put your question in the chat. Go ahead, Mercy.
Yeah, for the putting lineage-based legislation, how do we go about making resources available for, people who want to trace their lineage but don't have the resources or the capacity to do so? So basically making sure that that legislation is accessible for everybody.
Oh, that's a great question. So I think what we need to do is just broaden how we classify each group, and we understand what how they classify demographically, and then just seeing what resources that community needs, and just supplying them with how we could best help them. Because I understand we have Black people or from all across the diaspora, they come to America and they're still facing some inequities in the system. So we need to make sure that we are addressing everyone's needs and seeing how we can best assist them and, just listen to every community's needs, honestly.
Thank you. And then I see a question in the chat. So Evelyn says, I really appreciated your emphasis on listening to youth. What can other states do to create more opportunities for youth, young adults, and other lived experts to meaningfully shape policy and provide feedback?
They need to invite the youth to the conversation. Yes. Invite the youth to the conversation, to have them in the rooms, because you can't speak for the youth if you're not listening to them. You can't advocate for the youth if you're not listening to them. Invite them to the conversation. I think a lot of what's being lost in translation is that the youth is not present in the rooms where they need to be, and just making sure they're present. Just make sure they're present in the conversation, because they have needs specific to them, and no one's listening to them. So we're seeing the after effects of that right now, honestly, and it's really sad.
Thank you. And Kim, do you have any closing thoughts for our group on this recommendation before we move on?
You're welcome, Evelyn. My closing thoughts is I just hope that this conversation broadens what we can do and how we can best provide everyone, and just look at the issue from different perspectives and just come to the best solution for everyone, honestly. And just honestly, just having everyone in the same room, having a seat at the table, just to discuss what the issues are and just come to that solution.
Thank you so much. And thank you for spending time with us today, Kim. And with that, we will move on to recommendation number 3, to deviate from the use of first responders in all forms of punishment, retribution, and carceral control in homeless services, education, and child welfare settings, and invest in and implement safety mechanisms that are designed and defined by members of the community. As I give a legislative overview at a glance, I'd like to welcome Delegate Sean Stinnett from Maryland's House of Delegates, District 41, or Kareem, are you speaking on his behalf today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he actually was at a graduation today, so he was kind of held over. So I'm coming in. Yep.
Okay, then I'd like to welcome Kareem to the virtual stage, the Delegate's Chief of Staff. So this year, our Rec 3 Treasure Award goes to Vermont. Illinois takes home the trash, and Maryland receives an honorable mention, where we'll start as lawmakers proposed requiring licensed mental health therapists in public schools, a noteworthy investment in getting students support before challenges escalate. Our team recognized this with an honorable mention simply because while it expands access to mental health care, it doesn't directly address the continued reliance on school resource officers as a primary response to student needs, which we cover in our policy recommendation. Traveling north, Vermont earned our Treasure Award by investing in dedicated homeless liaisons and support services for students experiencing homelessness, recognizing that meeting students' basic needs can help keep them engaged in school and potentially out of the disciplinary system in the first place. Finally, our Trash Award goes to Illinois, where lawmakers proposed expanding funding for school resource officers instead of investing in community-based approaches to school safety. Our team found this concerning because it reinforces the school to prison pipeline rather than addressing the root causes that many young people face. And with that, jumping right into the discussion portion, thank you so much for being with us today, Kareem. Question number 1 for you. Many schools are facing a sharp increase in youth mental health needs, housing instability, and behavioral challenges. From your perspective, and on behalf of the delegate, what role should supportive services such as school-based mental health professionals play in helping young people thrive and stay connected to school?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Josh, and for the incredible speakers and everyone here on this great Zoom. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I actually started off as an educator for about 15 years in Baltimore City Public Schools. I didn't serve as a resource officer, but I did work with youth with different abilities. I say different abilities, not special needs, because everyone has their own unique abilities. And I also dealt a lot with youth that dealt with behavioral challenges. And as we just talked about, or previous speakers, most of them are dealing with so much inequity and inequality that's happening in their home that even when they get to the school, sometimes it's the one place where they can actually feel free, they can feel protected, and where they can express themselves. And sometimes they express themselves in a negative way. And that's usually based on, as everyone said, it's on youth voice. So I think it's critical for us to include youth voice, not even at the table. I don't even think the table should be formed unless youth are there. Youth have to be at the foundation of education. Youth have to be at the foundation of organizations as well. And so you have examples of that here. We have youth on boards and youth commissioners as well in Baltimore City. So I think that that's critical. And having them on the education board actually impacting policy and how they engage. You also have to have folks with lived experiences. So you have groups like Heart Smiles, CLIA, and other organizations who train you on how to engage with elected officials, how to engage, how to create school boards, and things of that nature. And then also in regards to youth voice, I think we have to talk directly to whether you're talking about school resource officers, Baltimore City police officers, or school police. I actually worked with an organization called No Boundaries. And what they did was they actually created a training video for police officers in Baltimore City Public Schools in Baltimore City. So over 3,000 officers have actually been trained on a video that was produced, written, and actually helped to be filmed by youth. And so they actually train them on how to engage with youth that may have behavioral challenges or may be dealing with homelessness or experiencing homelessness. And so it's critically important for our youth to be at the table as soon as the conversations begins. Because if we bring them on even later on, sometimes we don't even hit those KPIs and all those goals that we talk about. Sometimes they're going to see things that we don't see. And so I think that's critical for engaging with youth at the school level.
Thank you, Kareem. And, one trend we saw that I mentioned briefly this year was continued investment in school policing as a strategy for school safety. Why do many advocates view increased police presence in schools as contributing to the school to prison pipeline? And what community-based alternatives should policymakers consider instead as an alternative?
Absolutely. And so I think that us investing in school police, it is a part of addressing it, but honestly, most of the times it's a band-aid to, again, those fundamental challenges and issues that youth have. And so I think, again, it's very critical to talk to the youth before they even get to the door to understand what their needs may be. Also, we need to increase our services in regards to therapy as well, so that they don't even get to the place of the school police. So I think we do need to redirect those funds. I know some people said defund, but I think I look at it as redirecting the funds to things that are way more effective and impactful. And I work with Baltimore City Police, I work with school police, and many of them will say, yes, please give them the necessary tools to be able to process just a lot of pain and just growth that youth are going through. Also, we had the delegate work on passing a bill. It was the CALA Act that he was attempting to pass to be able to get more increased psychotherapy, social workers within the school system. Because many of our therapists that we have, they'll say, oh yeah, we have therapists. But some of those therapists, I believe the ratio in Baltimore was like 1 for every 1,000 youth, there's a psychotherapist. And I think for social workers, it was like 1 to every 500. So even though those things exist, many times we're putting people in a position that's impossible for you to serve 500 youth, even within 2 years, let alone in 1 year. And so we have to make sure that we increase those resources. And so that was one thing that we're looking to pass, hopefully next in our next session. So those things are critical. And again, making sure that we are empowering the youth to speak for themselves. We got to stop talking about being a voice for the voiceless. No, we have to provide choices for the choiceless. Because many of the youth feel like they don't have a choice. And so they'll ask for help, they'll ask for assistance, and then they're often rejected because they feel like they don't have choices. So giving them access to those resources, making sure that they have those choices within the school system and outside is critical for our youth.
Thank you. And Kareem, as we close, when you think about building safer schools and communities, what is one investment you believe would have a greater impact on youth well-being rather than punishment or enforcement?
That's a great question. I would say making sure that we're investing more in teaching youth on how to be adults. How many of us went to school and learned about our credit score? How many of us went to school and learned how to actually purchase a home? Many times we're just interacting with realtors. That's our first time we really even talk about our credit score and how that impacts things. When are we going to start teaching youth and bringing actually civics back and making it really useful and something that they can utilize every single day? Because these youth are engaging with the law on a punitive side, but they don't understand how to advocate for themselves on the other side. And so I think investing in those things within our school systems, and investing in our youth and making sure that we're changing our system. Our school system is based on studies from 1953 to like 1956. We're a totally different society. Technology and other things are being introduced. AI, all of these things are moving at such a rapid pace that we have to put that in our schools in order to empower the youth again to speak for themselves, give them the tools necessary to be able to just interact in this world as an adult. And so I think making sure that we look at the curriculum, making sure we're educating them, and we don't allow the federal government that's attacking just education and people just learning about themselves. We have to make sure that we are resisting that as well.
Thank you, Kareem, and thank you for your time with us on this recommendation. We will open up for Q&A from our audience now. If you have a question, please raise your hand or throw it in the chat. All right, we have a question in the chat from Emil. Hi, when you talk about moving away from carceral responses, what are some examples of supportive approaches that you've seen work well, particularly in schools?
That is a really, really good question. So things that I saw that moved away from carceral is that we have an organization here called We Are Us. These are men and women who have experience with the system. Some have done time as much as 10 years, some 20, some 30 years. And they came back home because they actually wanted to help community. So they literally walked the streets every single Monday, handing out pamphlets and flyers and engaging with the youth. They're stepping into the juvenile jails that we have here, and they're engaging with the youth prior to them coming out as well. So getting into those school systems. We also have an example of a school here called Eager Street Academy, where the youth that are actually incarcerated are going to school and they're learning before they're released to community. And so I think it's important that we are putting folks that have lived experience into the schools. So people that have done time, people who know them, people who are from the community, because I'm more likely to listen to my uncle or my cousin or nephew, and sometimes they may not be by blood, but they're folks in our community who we trust. And so I think placing people with lived experiences is really good because they can provide mentorship and support from somebody that they know, not someone that's a stranger or someone that may be well-intentioned. But if you're not from where I'm from, you're not culturally competent, you're not religiously competent, I can't even listen to you because you may care about me. But if you don't look like me, you don't have the same experiences as I have, it's difficult for me to listen. So I think bringing in those folks with lived experiences is critical. That's a great question.
Thank you, Kareem. And we will go ahead and close this section and move to our last recommendation. Thank you so much for jumping on and speaking on behalf of the Office of the Delegate. So,
yes, thank you. I'm honored. I appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you. And our last topic of discussion today is surrounding recommendation number 5 to fully support education pathways connected to basic human needs for all youth and young adults. As I give a brief overview of the legislative landscape here, I'd like to welcome Assembly Member Patrick Arns from California State Assembly District 26 and/or Robbie Silver, the legislative assistant. And this year, our Rec 5 Treasure Awards go to California, Hawaii, and North Carolina. Missouri and New Jersey receive honorable mentions, while New Jersey also doubled up on awards and takes home the trash as well. We'll start in California, where lawmakers prioritized housing for current and former foster youth who have experienced homelessness, recognizing that stable housing is essential to educational success. Our team identified this as treasure because meeting basic needs creates a stronger pathway to completing school and achieving long-term stability. Hawaii also earned a Treasure Award for proposing a pilot program to identify and address students' basic needs from housing and food security to transportation and campus supports. And in my home state of North Carolina, lawmakers took a step toward reducing the long term burden of student debt through proposing a student loan forgiveness initiative. Missouri and New Jersey receive honorable mentions for expanding access to higher education, but with eligibility requirements that could still leave some youth experiencing homelessness behind. Finally, our trash award also goes to the state of New Jersey, where lawmakers proposed legislation that our team found could disproportionately limit access to free higher education for Black and Brown students, creating additional barriers to education rather than expanding opportunity. As we near the end of our webinar today, but before we dive into another Q&A portion and have a dynamic closing speaker, we'll jump right into the discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today. Is it Maddie?
Hi, this is Robbie Silver from the Office of Assembly Errands. He should be hopping on in one moment. He's just getting on the Zoom right now.
Perfect. No worries. And we will take a brief commercial break. We don't actually have a commercial, but yeah.
It looks like Assembly Member Aaron's just joined us.
Okay, perfect. Hi, welcome in.
Hi, hello everyone.
Yeah, I will jump in, just throw you right into the deep end with our first question. And thank you so much for joining us. So many young people struggle to succeed in school because their basic needs, such as stable housing, food, and transportation, aren't being met. From your perspective, why is it important to address those needs as part of an educational pathway, particularly for youth and young adults who have experienced homelessness or other youth serving systems such as foster care?
Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me on today. I appreciate everyone's interest and involvement in this work. It's really important, and it's something that I'm dedicating a lot of my time doing in the state legislature. Ultimately, I think for the state of California, we just need to be better at meeting people where they are, rather than offering services or offering programs and expecting people to reach them. For example, before I was elected to the state legislature, I served on the community college board. And when I was a community college student, we didn't have a food pantry, we didn't have bus passes, we didn't have housing, because this sort of arcane old way of thinking of like everyone's just going to commute to community college and everyone has housing, and we don't offer those services because we're a junior college. And the evolution of that is meeting people where they are. Students can't succeed well in school if they don't have stable housing, if they don't have something to eat, if they don't have a reliable transportation. And so, we could accept that, the original intent of community colleges was just for people to commute, or we can meet students where they are and offer all of those basic needs, try to meet those basic needs. And we saw dramatic results and in the positive of students actually being able to succeed in their classes, no matter what backgrounds they come from, whether they're in foster care, whether they're homeless, like I was, frankly, like we got the people their services and we've seen dramatic results. It's not rocket science. People just need housing. They need food and their basic needs to be met, and they will succeed. And I've tried to bring that approach to the legislature, and I'm proud to have authored more foster care bill package bills than anyone in the legislature, to try and bring a renewed focus and attention on these issues. Again, meeting people where they are, not where society wants or expects them to be.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your wonderful work in the legislature this session. On the other side of the coin, one trend we saw this year was legislation that could make it harder for certain students to access free or affordable higher education opportunities. Why should access to education be viewed as a homelessness prevention strategy, and who is most harmed when barriers to education increase?
Well, it baffles me that there are those in our policy spaces that try to prevent those people from being, successful. I think the narrative that we need to combat and their narrative we need to push for is this notion that, oh, we can't help people because they have to go through what I went through growing up. And it's the same notion that people have about not wanting to cancel student debt or not wanting to offer free community college or not wanting to offer this or that. And the reality is the world was very different than many of those people who went to higher education. Our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, um, you know, higher education was essentially free in the 1960s in the higher education master plan. And over the years, it's just certainly not the case anymore. And so, the narrative that I'd like to keep pushing and talking about in these spaces is that it helps everyone. It helps the whole economy. It unlocks the economy. When we are giving people access to an education, no one can take away from them, they are going to be more productive. They are going to make it easier to find a job in this 21st century economy in Silicon Valley and beyond. They're going to be taxpayers. They're going to be feeding back into the system to help support the social safety net services that they need. And it just doesn't help one person, right? It just doesn't help the individual that you're helping deliver that program to. It helps everyone. And the same concept that giving people access to healthcare helps everyone. It's only costing us more and more that we have more uninsured people or underinsured people. It's costing us more in the long run. It's far cheaper to just give people health care. It's far cheaper to give people that education so that they can be productive in our economy than to shut that out or make more barriers and prevent them from getting jobs that they need to live. And so, we are fighting a narrative in that sense that, oh, offering these things only helps one person. It only helps the people that are recipients of this aid. And the reality is it unlocks the entire economy. It helps with childcare. It helps with, um, combating domestic violence. It helps with public safety. It helps with healthcare. It unlocks everything. It helps our small businesses. And so, that access to higher education is a great equalizer for all of us, and that's the narrative that we need to keep working on.
Thank you. And we've got 3 minutes, 2 questions. I know we can do it. So several states are exploring ways to expand college affordability and housing supports, but eligibility requirements can still unintentionally exclude young people experiencing homelessness or housing instability. What should policymakers keep in mind to ensure these opportunities are truly accessible for all?
Well, I think we need to be mindful of like how these programs, how our taxpayer dollars are being distributed, and who are they going towards. I this is my first term. I'm a freshman legislator, and we just passed the largest California budget in the history of our state, $351 billion, and allocating money and resources is really important. But so much of our conversations is, oh, we don't have enough money, we don't have this, we have the federal Trump cuts that are occurring. And I think that's sort of a false narrative. There's always money in a $351 billion budget. And so, and there are also false choices. We're also forced to contend with, oh, we just either need to cut programs or raise taxes. When in the state of California, we have $84 billion in corporate tax breaks that we give away that we never actually review in a comprehensive way to the public if it's being used the way in which we intend as taxpayers. And so same thing when it comes to our housing policy legislation. I think we need to ensure that these programs are being used and they are being benefited by the types of populations that we intend. And so part of my bill package is making sure that we prioritize housing for foster youth or for formerly homeless individuals or homeless individuals going to community college. More and more of our community colleges in California, 116 community colleges, are offering housing. And the priority for that housing should be those who need it, not just those who can afford to pay. And so we need to be seeing more of that.
Thank you. And as we close out this section of our webinar, if states could make one investment to connect education with housing and long-term stability better, what would you want policymakers to prioritize first?
Well, I think that is a good question to end with. I will say, if you want something done, do it yourself. So I think schools should invest in providing housing themselves, not waiting on the knight in shining armor of the state or the federal government or other people or other jurisdictions. We know that they are homeless students that we are serving. We know that they are housing insecure and homeless staffers and educators who are driving in hours away. And, we have school housing, we have school land, we have a school board who has jurisdiction over this, and we can build housing ourselves. And we can I'm proud before getting elected to pass the largest school bond in the history of Northern California at $898 million. And we dedicated $300 million of that for housing for students, faculty, and staff. And, no one told us to do that. A lot of people said that we can't do that, but we did it anyways. And we didn't wait to have someone else build housing. We know housing is an issue. So we're going to help. Just going to do it ourselves. And I think more schools, if they want to see that connection with, we need more affordable housing for our employees and the students that we serve, let's just build it ourselves because we have school property, we have a need, and we have a good message that the public will support. And if anyone would like help on figuring out how to do that, please contact my office because we were successful at doing that. And I think more school districts should follow suit.
I love that, and what a beautiful way to close before we open. Now for our Q&A from the audience. We are approaching time. Please do not leave. We have one more speaker for closing remarks, but please drop your question in the chat or come off mute. And if no questions, Assembly Member, if you would like to just close us out with any final thoughts on this subject.
I'll just say thank you. I'm really inspired. I'm also really inspired by the other assembly members and elected officials. I read your bios last night, and I really appreciate the work that you all are doing. And we're not accepting the status quo anymore. Wherever you represent, whatever communities you represent, we all have very different communities that we're fighting for, but we have a common thread in common, which is I think we have a sense of urgency to want to change things, and we want to also not accept, or wait our turn. And so, the community is asking that we do something, and I just am very inspired by the rest of the panelists and the elected officials who are here today because you all represent a sense of urgency that we need to really deliver actual results and not just be against somebody, but be for something. And so thank you all for inspiring me and continuing on this work.
Thank you so much for your time with us today. And we will transition to our closing remarks. So at the heart of the New Deal to End Youth Homelessness, which is our comprehensive policy framework, is a simple belief that those closest to the challenges should help design the solutions. And we are honored to close today's webinar with someone who embodies that principle every day. And with that, I'd like to welcome Representative Jubilee McGill from Vermont's House of Representatives, District 5. So, Representative,
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's get into it. So throughout today's conversation, we've talked about policies and systems, but you also shared with me how your own lived experience with homelessness shapes how you lead and legislate. How has centering that lived experience influenced your approach to policymaking? And why do you believe it's important for people directly impacted by these issues to be at the table when solutions are being designed?
Oh, thank you. So I often say to folks that as a legislator, having lived experience like mine changes the questions you ask. When you've experienced homelessness or poverty or instability yourself, I think that rather than seeing people as problems to solve, you see the systems that need to work better. I know just in conversations in the State House that to some of my colleagues, what may look like people making bad decisions is really often just folks who are struggling and doing the best that they can with really impossible choices. And I think we need to react to that. My own experiences have taught me that the barriers that people face really tend to be invisible to those who haven't lived them. I live in Vermont. We're very rural. We have, a huge mountain range that is right down the center of our state. So things like not having transportation, not having identification, not knowing where you're going to sleep that night or how you're going to fill your belly, or just really trying to navigate systems with really, really deep trauma. Those aren't a frame of reference for a lot of the people who are making decisions in our state house. So I find that those realities generally don't show up in policy discussions unless someone in the room has lived them. And so that's why, in my legislature, I'm a strong proponent that regardless of the topic at hand, that people with lived experience need to be at the table and not just as a token or a symbolic gesture, which is something we often do. But because they really make policy better. They ask different questions. They can see the unintended consequences that others often miss. They know where our systems break down because they've experienced those breakdowns firsthand, often over and over again. And I'd say, one of the things I'm really most proud of in the work I've done and the policies I've been able to get passed is that those policies were shaped through conversations like with young people who have actually navigated our systems.
Thank you so much for sharing. And my last question for you, for the advocates, the youth and young adults, and community members joining us today, what's one piece of advice you would give us about effectively educating policymakers and advocating for change?
Yeah, this was a hard one to narrow down. But I would just say never underestimate the value of your story. I think very early on, a good friend and former legislator told me, your experience is the letters after your name. I was feeling a lot of imposter syndrome and not in line with a lot of my peers. Because I had a lot of trauma and a lot of barriers I had to overcome just to get to where I am today. So I would say that things like statistics and research data really, really matter. But it's the stories that actually create the urgency that gets people to act. So it's that combination of data and lived experience that is so powerful. And to go with that, I think that proximity changes policy. We really saw that in our state house this year. I think when legislators are able to spend time with youth experiencing homelessness, when they get the opportunity to visit shelters, drop-in centers, transitional housing. And when they get to hear from young people, the conversation changes. This year in our state house, I was able to organize our first Youth Homelessness Awareness Day, and it was so powerful. And I still have colleagues reaching out to me. I'm actually meeting with a colleague this weekend about an idea they had that they want to get advice on how we could implement it. So those types of opportunities and experiences will really stick with legislators, long past the committee hearing is over. So whenever you can connect that lived experience with the people in power, I think that's really where the magic happens.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you so much for your time with us today. And with that, I have said a lot of words, so I'm going to pass over to my colleague, the wonderful Aurora Higgs, our Associate Director of Communications, for our next steps.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to say this has been such a great webinar, and I'm so thankful to everyone, especially our elected officials who could join us. Quick note is I can see you all here. My camera is here, so it's a little, if you're seeing the side of my head, sorry about that. Just want to let everyone know to make sure that you are able to join us for our second webinar, which is here on September 3rd. And as AWHA Home America works toward increasing and implementing our policy footprint at both the federal and state and local levels, we need you here. So in order to do that, we have a few ways that you can engage with us. And as we transform systems through public policy to end homelessness for Black, Indigenous, youth of color, and LGBTQIA+ youth on a pathway to housing justice for all. Once again, we'd like to make sure you all, advocates, community members, and leaders, direct service providers, and youth and young adults with lived experience, join us on Thursday, September 3rd, as we continue our discussion. What stood out to you today, and what trickle-down effects from federal government decisions are you seeing in your state and in your community? Reach out to us if you'd like to be a potential moderator, and either way, come discuss and weigh in on the strategies that we could lay out as a collective movement. And before we go, I want to invite you to stay connected with AWHA Home America and our work. So let me just throw that in the chat here. Are some links, and those links are also here. And yeah, join us, either check out our website at awayhomeamerica.org. You can follow us on our social media pages. Our IG is The Real AWHA Home America, and we are mostly AWHA Home America on everything else. And yeah, so thank you for attending this year's Trash and Treasure across all levels. And I look forward to seeing you all on September 3rd for the community weigh-in, and have an amazing day. If you also want to make sure that you have access to this recording, you can check that out on our YouTube page at youtube.com/@AWHAHomeAmerica.
Thank you all. And if any of our speakers want to stay on for a few minutes, feel free. If not, we understand competing schedules. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you all soon.